what are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
Welcome to the Bible Nation podcast. I'm Doug Levesque. Joining me are two of Michigan's top cultural influencers, Mr. Tony Nash, owner of AZ Business Solutions in Owasso, Michigan, and specialist in all forms of advertising and promotion. And also, Pastor Jason Georges of the Emmanuel Baptist Church of Corunna, Michigan, one of the most active movers of societal thought today. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today, for engineering this podcast, and for joining us.
This is fun.
We are again here at Emmanuel Baptist Church with a live studio audience. And so, audience, thanks for being here and coming an extra hour early before church services. This is a great place to discuss how the Bible influences culture. The best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven and it works. Check out all of today's topics, articles, books, and of course our podcast at BibleNation.org. Well, this is an interesting topic. We've all been through COVID, the ups and the downs at first.
Still going through.
Yeah, we're still going through COVID. At first, we're all afraid, and if we just take 4 weeks, we're going to conquer, right? 4 weeks of quarantine, we're going to conquer, and then that turns into 2 months, and then businesses are shut down, and jobs are lost, and lives are changed, et cetera, et cetera. And now we're all the way into mandates, injections, and boosters, and how many boosters, and people losing their job, and OSHA mandating these rules, and the courts now stopping it, and so everybody's up in arms. Nobody really knows what the truth is, and so we're being told that the injection's safe, and then at the same time we're being told that it's not even been approved by the FDA. The boosters haven't even been applied for, and yet they're already out there and being circulated. I know over in Europe, the last couple of days, nationwide mandates have brought out huge crowds to kind of protest against that, and of course those nations don't have the same liberties that we have, and so the police have come out and quelched those protests, and people have gone to the hospital, and so that's what's going on today as we discuss this.
Right.
And go ahead.
And it's encouraging to see people organizing themselves and resisting and standing up. Mm-hmm. We've all been, regardless of what country you've been live in, we all have a brain.
Right.
And this has exceeded beyond common sense.
It's good to see that universally people are going, what's going on here?
Right.
Whether they have the same liberties or not, they're confronted, and their level of ability to tolerate what's going on is kind of at the end.
Yeah. Which what we're about to discuss in this podcast is not simply an American perspective or just the result of American culture, but is a global issue that needs to have a global response by Bible advocates.
Well, if you think back to the very beginning when this all first started happening, in the news reports that there was this potential virus that was going to turn into a pandemic, everybody was a little concerned of that. And then when it happened and they asked for 2 weeks to kind of slow the spread and flatten the curve, whatever the terminology used at that time, it seemed like the rational thing to do. But then after that, almost immediately after that, as things started to happen, not just locally, but around the globe, and things started to turn into another 2 weeks and another 2 weeks, and everything was done in these small time increments. Just so people realize and they never gave us an end in sight, just a little 2 weeks, let's see how this goes. And it was like we started to realize, Bible advocates started to think, this just does not seem right. Something doesn't smell right here. And our inner conspiracy theory mind may have started going off, but it just didn't seem like something was right. And so understanding what we're going to talk about today and this kind of global reset that's happening, it's really, really crazy to see how this thing has gone this long.
Right away, we said, hey, the math doesn't work here.
Right.
The math doesn't work. This is unprecedented, this kind of response, that it would be global. It's not logical, the response.
Right.
So we immediately began to look at what's really going on here. And probably 3 to 4 months in, I wrote an article for the Bible Nation Society that was about COVID-19 and how it was more or less, the responses were kind of a coup d'etat, a global coup d'etat,
right,
that was changing the paradigm of life and governance, everything, in just a few months. And I said, can you throw out an old paradigm and create a new world order in just 3 or 4 months. And we read that article, I think, months ago, early on in that, and have promoted that on our website at BibleNation.org. And what we're going to read today is kind of the other side, the left, if you will, globalists, if you will. Their response almost is saying to that conjecture, yeah, that's exactly what this is. This was a planned, or at least our responses are planned, and they call it the Great Reset.
Right.
It's just starting to get in the news. Pundits like Glenn Beck have a book coming out in 2022 that he has in the title something about the Great Reset or whatever. And of course, that's being billed as, poor Glenn's going to get assassinated for, what's in
that
this
sells
book.
more books.
Yeah, it sells more books or whatever for that.
Clickbait.
You're worth more dead anyways.
Yeah, exactly. Or, Glenn Beck did not commit suicide. That whole meme as well. So we titled this The Great Reset today, and so I thought I'd really bring all of our listeners and watchers up to date on what that really is, what it really means, because, right away the vocabulary starts to twist and turn and definitions get changed. So,
and they're not proposing, what we're about to say here has not been, the manual for the Great Reset has not been downloaded to everybody. We have been, Tony mentioned this a couple of minutes ago, 18 months of being spoon-fed an agenda at a level that we're willing to tolerate.
Right.
And along the way, they've overstepped a couple times. They spoon-fed too much, the scoop was too big. We choked on it, and there was a little pushback. So you see that over the last 18 months that with no clear targets in sight of what the goal is, the goal line's always changing, and it's always just enough to get us through the next little bit of season to keep people right there on the edge. And really what it is, it's the trap of those that society would say are the reasonable. I mean, so we're probably outside the fringe of what is considered reasonable. But it's those that consider themselves reasonable, and they're like, oh man, I don't know if I can go there with you guys. But how long are you going to be reasonable? I mean, how long are you going to stay there in that middle ground of reasonable? When does this become unreasonable?
Right. And I know I've thought like, okay, well, if this is conspiratorial, if there are some people that are coming up with the response or maybe utilizing COVID-19, initially, who would that be?
Right.
Who would it be? And that's hard to, conjecture. But this is an article called "Now is the Time for the Great Reset." And the author is Klaus Schwab. Most of us really haven't heard that name, but he's a preeminent name on the earth. And he has been since the 70s, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but he's the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. The news oftentimes introduces it as Davos, right? You hear oftentimes the United Nations terminology of the G8, the 8 most important nations, or the G20, the 20 most important nations. And that's kind of the UN verbiage that's used or been accepted politically. In other words, there's this idea of global governance from the idea of politicians getting together or nations, cooperating or subjecting themselves to something else. But the World Economic Forum is saying, no, let's supersede, let's fly by nations. Let's fly by people's national sovereignty and their ability to vote. And let's go right to the corporate and economic ideals, because that kind of universally, skirts everybody. And he's the one that has written this book called The Great Reset. And the who's who of society know this book. In fact, it's called COVID-19 and The Great Reset. And so I just want to read to you this. These are not our words, these are his words.
Right.
And so they're eerie when you read them, because the things that we would all kind of shudder at regarding global governance are the exact words that he's using. The things that we would, kind of shudder at regarding what is COVID-19 being used for. It's a hurdle, it's a door, and we're going through this door of COVID-19. What's on the other side of it? Right. That's being discussed, it's been planned, it's being executed, and this is their verbiage, and this is their philosophy. He says, this is our best chance to instigate stakeholder capitalism. Now that sounds nice because we're capitalists, but stakeholder capitalism is a different vocabulary, it has a different definition than capitalism. Stakeholder capitalism basically says, let's not just think about the people investing the money or the people in buying the product. Let's think about everybody else around it and make sure that they're getting something. Well, that's the reconstitution of wealth, redistribution of wealth.
Right.
So stakeholder capitalism is the same thing as communism.
Right.
All right, it's just the word that they're using.
Right.
It's the buzzword that they're using. And here's how it can be achieved. So this is what the book's about. COVID-19 and the Great Reset is about how do we set out. The Great Reset is a word that, like the communists of 1917 and 18 would have said, revolution. So the Great Reset really means revolution. Okay, so COVID-19 is going to create a great revolution, economic revolution, where we can instigate stakeholder capitalism, which means the redistribution of wealth, and
Which is the next step of hope and change.
yes, exactly. And Biden's Build Back Better.
Right.
That's their terminology. That's where
Right.
it comes from. And he says COVID-19 lockdowns may be gradually easing, but anxiety about the world's social and economic prospects is only intensifying. There is good reason to worry. A sharp economic downturn has already begun, and we could be facing the worst depression since the 1930s, but while this outcome is likely, it is not unavoidable. In other words, here's the answer. To achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly. To achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of societies and economies, from education to social contracts, aka marriage, and working conditions, all labor. Every country from the United States to China must participate, and every industry. So we're superseding, and we're just talking about whoever your boss is now.
Yeah.
And so if we can't have a legal top-down government mandate, well, then we're going to work through this corporation or this economic institution to institute the rules as well.
And you're seeing that right now with the vaccine mandate.
The vaccine mandate is illegal. The courts have stopped it, but companies are still executing, firing employees for not participating.
Because they believe it's inevitable.
Because this is the verbiage that's going on. And so they say, from oil and gas to tech, it must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism, aka read or hear, we need another communist revolution. Okay? And so that's really what globalism is. It's really global communism. When they talk about the green revolution or a green economy, really they mean red. Okay, like red communism. That's really what they mean. But they decided in the 90s to use these different kind of words, stakeholder capitalism, etc. There are many reasons to pursue a great reset, but the most urgent is COVID-19. Having already led to hundreds of thousands of deaths, the pandemic represents one of the worst public health crises in recent history, and with casualties still mounting in many parts of the world, it's far from over. Now that's interesting because if you look at death totals in the United States or anywhere else in the world, they're the same as they were before. In other words, we don't have dead people lying in the streets.
Right.
There's not this Hollywood-style thing where birds are dropping out of the sky and people are just blowing up themselves because they got some
Spontaneous
combustion.
And other forms of death are
They become
gone.
a great big pimple, full of infection, and they just roll over and die.
Right.
That's not happening because, obviously it's not logical.
That's not funny if it happened.
The math doesn't work. There is something going on.
Yeah.
But it's not creating this effect. But nevertheless, if we keep saying this is the effect, the bigger the lie, the more people will believe it. This will have serious long-term consequences for economic growth, public debt, employment, and human well-being. According to the Financial Times, global government debt has already reached its highest level in peacetime. Moreover, unemployment is skyrocketing in many countries. In the U.S., for example, 1 in 4 workers have filed for unemployment since mid-March, with new weekly claims far above historic highs. Now, the reality is every store up and down our financial strip here is hiring. And so that's kind of a misleading idea that we're having this economic downturn with all this because everyone's saying we need to hire somebody. Please come, we'll give you more money, we'll give you training, etc. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, expects the world economy to shrink by 3% this year, a downgrade of 6.3 percentage points in just 4 months. So this response is probably not the right response. It's not the right facts, it's not the right medical response, it's not the right economic response, but nevertheless they're getting these numbers that they can quote to try to bring about a great reset. All of this will exacerbate the climate and social crisis. This is all the climate crisis, right?
Right.
That doesn't make sense. The social crisis, what social crisis?
Right. Manufactured
more
crisis.
transgenders are dying this year than any other year. It says that we're already underway. Some countries have already used the COVID-19 crisis as an excuse to weaken environmental protections and enforcement. I don't know that that's true absolutely at all. They're using COVID-19 as an excuse to strengthen their heavy-handed response.
Right.
So that's interesting how they use the lie and use an accusation, and yet they're really doing the exact same thing that they're accusing other people of. And frustrations over social ills like rising inequality, U.S. billionaires' combined wealth has increased during the crisis are intensifying. Well, the people that are really getting rich are is the billions being made off the
Pharmaceutical companies.
Companies.
So the booster or the vaccine available for children under the age of 12 immediately results in the stock price of Pfizer and the other major pharmaceuticals doubling the next day.
And it's manipulated and it's mandated.
Yeah. Yes.
We must build entirely new foundations for our economic and social systems. I don't think anybody here listening to us today believes that we need to entirely rebuild all the foundations for our economic and social systems.
Right.
Let's throw out the Constitution and let's just write a new one and let's have this great reset based on more like Marxist, globalist ideals. And that's really what everybody's excited about here. The level of cooperation and ambition this implies is unprecedented. Yes. Yeah. It is unprecedented, but it is not some impossible dream. In fact, one silver lining of the pandemic, I underline that, one silver lining of the pandemic.
Right.
Now, I'm not sure that it really equates to a pandemic, as a pandemic really should be, but nevertheless, they have a silver lining to it.
Because you never let a crisis, supposed, go
pass,
away.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that it has shown how quickly we can make radical changes to our lifestyles.
Yeah.
Like none of us wanted that, but it's shown how quickly we can do that. Almost instantly, the crisis forced businesses and individuals to abandon practices long claimed to be essential, aka church, right? From frequent air travel to working in an office. So this is their mindset. It blows my mind that they're using the exact verbiage that I said.
Hidden in plain sight.
What's that?
Hidden in plain sight.
Hidden in plain sight. That's right. Likewise, populations have overwhelmingly shown a willingness to make sacrifices for the sake of healthcare and other essential workers and vulnerable populations, such as the elderly. That's a new virtue.
It's almost as if the last 18 months has been a grand social experiment to prove their hypothesis that we would react in the way that we have been reacting.
Populations have overwhelmingly shown a willingness.
Right.
Like they measured what they're going to measure.
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. And many companies have stepped up to support their workers, customers, and local communities in a shift toward the kind of stakeholder capitalism to which they have previously paid lip service.
We're all in this together.
Right. Clearly the will to build a better society, and I underline that, build a better society. That's what the economic bill that Biden just passed, right? The Build Back Better. To build a better society does exist. We must use it to secure the great reset that we so badly need, revolution, that will require stronger and more effective governments. Stronger and more effective governments. Our government, through the Constitution, was made to be purposefully weak and hard to get things done.
Right.
That's how we made it so that we wouldn't be able to bring about
gridlock in Washington is not a bad thing.
That's how it was. It was how it was written up, right?
Right.
Where are we at?
That would require stronger.
Yeah, that we require stronger and more effective governments, though this does not imply an ideological push for bigger ones. Like, we don't need a bigger one, we just need a central one with more power, right? And it will demand private sector engagement every step of the way. It will demand private sector engagement. So this is public-private sector coming together, okay? So we're going to take this economic forum and we're going to turn it into the authority.
Right.
And so we don't need the government. We have an economic forum that's going to become the authority. So this is the dream.
And we're already seeing it because who's being asked to enforce the mandates?
Yes,
right.
Kroger, Myers.
Right.
Yeah.
The greeter at Meijer is being asked to be the community enforcer of these standards.
He becomes a civil servant and some sort of quasi-enforcer, something like that. So at a time of diminishing tax bases and soaring public debt, governments have a powerful incentive to pursue such action. Moreover, governments should implement long overdue reforms that promote more equitable outcomes. So equitable outcomes is this communist buzzword of redistribution of wealth, right? We all are equal, and so we should have equal outcomes. That's not true, right? If I'm a better singer than you are, and I'm not a good singer, but I'm a better singer than both you guys, all right? Then if I cut a record,
challenge accepted.
Right. Well, we'll cede the point.
Sing off.
Okay, when we're done, that's happening.
Challenge.
We're happening. So then my record's going to sell more than yours, but because we need equitable outcomes, then you're going to get a third of the shares.
Depends what
of
you
the-
sing about.
Yes.
This is true. This is true. You guys are more righteous than I, so we won't go there.
I don't know.
It says, depending on the country, these may include changes to wealth taxes, the withdrawal of fossil fuel subsidies, and new rules governing intellectual property, trade, and competition. So that means if this guy can sing and this guy can't, if this guy can write a book but this guy can't write a book, it's going to have equitable outcomes. The second component of the Great Reset agenda would assure that investments advance shared goals such as equality and sustainability. Here, the large-scale spending programs that many governments are implementing represent a major opportunity for progress. The European Commission, for one, has unveiled a plan for $826 billion recovery fund. The U.S., China, and Japan have also ambitious economic stimulus plans.
Yeah.
Rather than using these funds, as well as investments from private entities and pension funds, to fill cracks in the old system, we should use them to create a new one that is more resilient, equitable, and sustainable in the long run, a global economy. This means, for example, building green urban infrastructure and creating incentives for industries to improve their track record on environmental, social, and governance metrics. The third and final priority of the Great Reset agenda is to harness the innovations of the fourth industrial revolution. That's another buzzword, the fourth industrial revolution, and that really kind of means Bitcoin. Every individual is a bank through blockchain connections. That's kind of what he's talking about, to support the public good, especially by addressing health and social challenges. During the COVID-19 crisis, companies, universities, and others have joined forces to develop diagnostics, therapeutics, and possible vaccines, establish testing centers, create mechanism for tracing infections. That's just tracing you, right? And deliver telemedicine. By the way, telemedicine seems like a great idea. I've had to do it several times, but there's no privacy in telemedicine.
Right.
There's no privacy in telemedicine. Imagine what could be possible if similar concerted efforts were made in every sector. So we're going to go beyond those sectors, and we're going to make the same improvements in every sector. So it's pretty grievous when it says every sector. It means everything. Think about AKA education, religion, etc. The COVID-19 crisis is affecting every facet of people's life in every corner of the world. Think about that. That's what he's saying. We want the response to affect every facet of people's life in every corner of the world. So this is not just a global economics, AKA finances. This is a global order of your economics and of your finances and of your life. But tragedy need not be its only legacy. On the contrary, this is his famous quote, Klaus Schwab's famous quote. The pandemic represents, okay, I didn't know the pandemic represented anything, but this is his response. The pandemic represents, perhaps maybe it was planned, right? And the response was to represent. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. Communist revolution under Mr. Schwab. And so show a picture of Mr. Schwab up there, guys, if you have that. Okay. Looks like a guy I want to give the world order to. No, he's actually a professor in Switzerland, has a Harvard degree, and started his organization, we'll see, in 1971, and began inviting who's who of people to get together. And so over the course of my lifetime, he's put together a who's who of people who are certified World Economic Forum devotees. And I do mean certified, as in they have his endorsement. So if you're in Europe and you're running for office, or you're trying to get the job as a bank manager or something, then having his certification is huge. Okay, so he's been doing that for my whole lifetime. So when you think of Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron from France, I mean, you can go on and on in the United States as well. These are people that have been to the forum, that have the certification. They understand what these words mean. They're using them. In America, they kind of change them and twist them a little bit. Pete Buttigieg, the homosexual mayor of South Bend, who's now in charge of infrastructure in the United States. And of course, the infrastructure bill gets passed, which means Pete Buttigieg gets to decide what the priorities are on rebuilding. Well, he didn't mention infrastructure, but he said every aspect of everyone's life.
Right.
And so this guy's got that sort of mentality. And so communist revolution with this public money is going to go where I determine it's going to go. And
no, one of the first issues that he brought up was the racial inequality in our highway infrastructure.
Yeah.
And it got all the way down to the height of bridges.
Right.
Bridges were the height of bridges was discrimination.
Roads were racist.
Right, roads, basically, yeah, bridges were racist, roads were racist. Right. You know, on that article you were just referencing, there's a chart, a circle chart there at the end that probably needs to be in the show notes here. But when they use terms like redesigning social contract skills and jobs. Okay, what does that mean? Well, then they are bold enough now to kind of draw the lines to the items of what that means. And things like justice and law, human rights, civic participation, gender parity, LGBTI inclusion.
Right.
And so this is their definition of reconstructing the social contract.
And really, this is going to play out well in the new metaverse for Facebook, because we can kind of stylize this kind of society in that universe, and all of our young people for the next 10 years can play in that universe and get acclimated to the kind of world that they want to play in.
Right.
And of course, we're already seeing that today to a great extent without all those measures, but they don't want incrementalism. I think Vice President Harris just said that. She said, we don't have the leisure of incrementalism, and that means bringing about things slowly. We need to bring it about fast now. And that's what they were just in Davos here recently.
Well, on the weforum.org Great Reset page, which is their blog page, under the title, The Opportunity, here's their first sentence. Right. As we enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, this initiative will offer insight to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations, the direction of national economies, and priority of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of the global commons. Drawing from the vision and vast expertise of leaders engaged across the forum's communities, the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract that honors the dignity of every human being.
Right.
So it truly is a great erasing of everything we know now and a reset.
And you could go online to World Economic Forum and just examine this stuff for yourself. We're not making it up. But they call their website We Forum. Mm-hmm. And so we were talking about the old 1970s movies, Thief in the Night, about a one world government. It's going to, be run by the Antichrist and kill all the Christians and all that kind of stuff. And but this is interesting. It's called We. Right. We Forum, us, we.
The bad guys in that was Unite, wasn't it?
Unite. Yeah, Unite, which is a beautiful word, right? But we is a good thing. So the We Forum, and put the book up there. The cover of the book, and this guy didn't pay anybody, Josiah, for design on his book cover, but COVID-19, the Great Reset, and understand that if you're in these circles, you understand the wink wink here, the Great Revolution. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting that they call it COVID-19 because they're waiting for this sort of thing. I think in some regards this thing has been engineered. People have been waiting for this and talking about this. We just need something. What will that something be? And COVID-19, what it is and what the response to it doesn't make sense. The math doesn't work. The logic doesn't work. And the reason is because it doesn't have to. We just have to get all these different media personalities, government personalities, economic personalities. The NBA was the first one to come out and say, we're going to shut down the season and have closed games and all this kind of stuff. And so if the NBA does it, that must mean something. If Harvard University does it, then it must be something important, Right. And so, but that was already engineered. It was already an engineered response in much of society. And so here, remember this name, Klaus Schwab. There's some stuff going around on the internet the last 3 or 4 days that he got arrested and stuff. But then he put out a statement saying, I didn't get arrested. And so you never know what's going on, in these particular regards. But other than that, just, go to what you'd call big name media outlets and their information about the guy. It's eerie enough just reading his own words. I'm not misrepresenting his words. I'm just reading his own words to him, and it's kind of eerie there.
And if you watch any type of media, you're hearing this terminology over and over and over and over again.
Right. And so this kind of stuff, ought not to be spoken about in a church house, by Christians. To young people, but I would say this is precisely the forum.
And not on a podcast that's going everywhere.
Right, exactly. And so show the other slide that we gave of the logo of the World Economic Forum. And so you see the world here, and there's a heavy line at the bottom of the logo here, kind of saying we're going to turn the world upside down. We're going to re-weight the world. And the World Economic Forum, the line there is going through the 3 zeros, and it to me almost looks like a 6, and a 6, and a 6. And so I know I'm pretty imaginative about that, but it's funny how the world just has accepted that meme, and it almost means something funny, anymore about what we're trying to do. And so, but we just heard in very dignified, educated, respectable circles where everybody meets in a 3-piece suit and a $1,000 watch, and these are the words that they're using. That really the ideas are right out of Scripture that God said the world's going to come to one day. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be not ignorant of Satan's devices, right? Not ignorant of Satan's devices.
And I just want to say, you have an incredible gift of being able to see 666 in a logo.
Oh yeah,
it's a gift.
I can, and so if it's not there, I'll put it in there.
It'll be in there.
I'll find it in there.
As you're reading that article or in that synopsis, there was a term that you read through that is very critical, I believe, and it was the word national debt. National debt. Let's rewind our nation's history back 300 years.
Right.
So as we're trying to determine, we're talking about Washington, Hamilton, Adams, Jefferson. Mm-hmm. We're trying to determine what kind of country we're going to be. Are we going to be a loose confederation of states, or are we going to have a strong federal government?
Right.
Hamilton realized the way to make the country be together as one was for the federal government to incur the war debt of all the individual states. And so realizing that this then de facto would then create a national bank. Right. But this
having a national debt was a unifying factor for the United States. Were you going to be a Federalist or an Anti-Federalist?
Right.
And Hamilton was a Federalist, and he said, let's incur debt and let's get a big loan. And where did he get a loan from? British banks.
Right.
That we had just
the ones that we had just defeated, right?
And so all of a sudden now we have a national debt that unified all the states together.
So the debt that supposedly we've been told that our national debt has become, it's irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Just the number can go, but ultimately debt is a tool of control.
Right.
And so what will the last straw that will sell out American sovereignty is an impossible debt that is sold to somebody else, which is already being sold to other else, because there's more stake. China owns more of America than America owns China. Right. And so it is this debt, when that gets called in, then all the water will be let out of the bag.
Right. And that'll be a way for everybody to say, well, yeah, if we have a great reset and that means we don't have to pay our debts, yeah, we'll go for that. Right. And that's kind of things that are...
That will be the exchange. Yeah, I declare bankruptcy.
So I wanted to then talk about the World Economic Forum. We've talked about Schwab and his book and his philosophy. Let's talk about the organization then that he formulated that we now call the World Economic Forum, which seems to be now where the impetus is coming from, more and more from the 70s, more so than the United Nations or NATO or the BRICS nations or any sort of governmental compartmentalization or expansion. It's coming from this particular arena, right? Digital currency, I think, is going to speed this up as it's implemented. But he says the forum is best known for its annual meeting in Davos. Through the years, numerous business, government, and civil society leaders have made their way to the High Alps to consider the major global issues of the day and to brainstorm on solutions to address these challenges. While many global institutions are notable for the breadth of nations or the powerful political leaders attending their gatherings, the World Economic Forum annual meeting, and indeed all the activities and initiatives of the forum around the world, are distinguished by the active participation of government, business, and civil society. What does that mean? By certifying those that attend, they go home and activate in their government, in their societies, however they can, these particular ideas. So whether they're going back to Japan or India or wherever else, they're doing that. So it's not just attendance, it's active participation. So Davos is not like, say, Bilderberger, meetings where the world's elite come and they talk about things. This is based upon active participation, okay? The forum engages the most experienced and most promising, all working together in the collaborative and collegial, quote-unquote, spirit of Davos. So everybody is going to a charismatic tent revival, right? And they're leaving with the spirit of Davos to take back into their country with these ideas.
Agenda.
Professor Klaus Schwab founded what was originally called the European Management Forum. As a nonprofit foundation based in Geneva, Switzerland, it drew business leaders from Europe and beyond to Davos for an annual meeting each January. Initially, Professor Schwab focused the meetings on how European firms could catch up with U.S. management practices. Now, this was as a professor, this was his idea, but what he was saying is, how can Europe beat the United States? That's what he was saying. He also developed and promoted the stakeholder management approach, which we talked about, stakeholder capitalism, which based corporate success on managers taking account of all interests, not merely shareholders, clients, and customers, but employees and the communities with which they operate, including government. Professor Schwab's vision for what would become the World Economic Forum, grew steadily as a result of achieving milestones, incrementalism. Events in 1973, namely the collapse of the Bretton Woods fixed exchange rate mechanism, in other words, the dollar was based on gold. That broke, and so the dollar was based upon more or less consumer confidence. Most of you know here in Michigan, we've had the University of Michigan Consumer Confidence Index. And basically the strength of the dollar was kind of based upon that, somewhat tied to the petrodollar, the price of oil. Therefore, our relationships with Saudi Arabia and Iraq and all this was very important. And so, and then also the Arab-Israeli War. And it saw the annual meeting expand its focus from management to economic and social issues. Political leaders were invited for the first time to Davos in January 1974. Remember, this is when China opened up and was going to become a capitalistic, nation or whatever, and trade with the world as well. 2 years later, the organization introduced a system of membership for the 1,000 leading companies of the world. So this was not just using the UN, or this was the UN's doing politics over here, but we're doing business conglomeration over here. The European Management Forum was the first non-governmental institution to initiate a partnership with China's Economic Development Commission, spurring economic reform policies in China. Basically, China uses its state communist money to invest in and run capitalistic organizations outside of China, not inside of China, outside of China. And so they come to the United States and make money and then take it home and fund the military, so to speak, or whatever. So they say they believe in capitalism to the extent that they practice it in our country. By the way, Kamala Harris's husband is chief attorney for the main law firm for the Chinese Communist Party in the United States. Yeah. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? The president just had
just a side note,
a medical emergency colonoscopy, and she was sworn in as emergency leader for 20 minutes. The news said that was the first time a woman had that. That was the news, not this is the first time that a woman who's married to the chief lead attorney for the Chinese Communist Party in the United States is now in charge of the United States for 20 minutes. So anyways, that's not important, but who wins Dancing with the Stars is, and The Bachelorette, those are important things, right? We just got to pay attention to the right things. 2 years later, the European Management Forum was the first non-governmental institution to initiate a partnership with China. I read that. In other words, basically they're saying we're an entity into ourselves. We supersede Europe, we supersede China, we supersede America, we supersede governments, we supersede all these businesses. Our persons and our ideas are an institution in and of themselves. It's like someone saying, I'm going to be God. I'm going to run the world, And that's more or less what they were able to incrementally bring about over the last 50 years. And eventually, they had meetings for North and South Korea, held their first ministerial level meetings in Davos. East German Prime Minister Modrow and German Chancellor Kohl met to discuss German reunification. South African President de Klerk met Nelson Mandela at the annual meeting. And so they've become the chief place for national discussions to come, and they've become a peace broker now as well. So now they are into politics. In 2015, the forum was formally recognized as an international organization. It is now in the next phase of its journey as the global platform for public-private cooperation. What that means is there's not going to be any private industry. It's going to be government/private industry. That's how they're going to do it. They're going to make sure that everybody's taxed. And of course, just recently, our Senate hasn't approved of it, but basically 138 nations have agreed to a global tax. And that's exactly what these guys are trying to bring about. to bring about a global tax. So that's its history, the World Economic Forum. It's not a benign institution. It's never been a benign institution. It's been functioning for 50 years with this ideology bringing about at this time. So whether there's a Trump in charge of the United States or a Biden in charge of the United States, we got the same people going to the same meetings, talking the same language, trying to bring about the same reset. And so I don't know if it would matter that COVID-19 was introduced when Trump was president or Biden was president. Nevertheless, the response was going to be the same. In fact, it was introduced in the Trump presidency, and his response is really no different than what Biden's response has been.
Sure.
And so it's not so much play the blame game or play the party game as much as understand what the Bible says society is going to head to and where society is heading today, albeit under unique auspices, aka lies. We're going to use these vocabulary words, but really we mean something else. And the Bible says that the devil is a liar and that he is the father of lies. And so he's going to offer people the truth. He's going to offer people a golden apple that's going to solve all their problems, and that they could, essentially, we're going to give everyone on earth a utopia where you never die.
Well, at least that's what's being proposed.
It's an Eden-like promise.
Right, but it'll be a false promise.
Yeah.
It's a lie.
It's a lie.
It's absolutely a lie. And so everybody's a little bit afraid. Everybody feels that little bit of pressure, and that's being made. And so that's supposed to kind of head us or pinch us to that location. So people need to realize that, Jeremiah was full of woe and full of sorrow, full of warning society before the great destruction came. But in Jeremiah 17, 7 and 8, despite all that woe, despite all, of that sorrow, Jeremiah says in chapter 17, verse 7, "Blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is. For he shall be as a tree planted by the waters, and that spreadeth out her roots by the river, and shall not see when heat cometh, but her leaf shall be green, and shall not be careful in the year of drought." In other words, we ought not to be overcome with fear or with worry about these things. If we serve the Lord, the promises of the Lord are always with us,
Amen.
Even if we're in the year of drought, even if we're in the valley of the shadow of death. And then I like what David said in Psalm 62, verse 10, "Trust not in oppression, and become not vain in robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart upon them." Don't worry about your money. Don't worry about your increase or national increase or otherwise. Set your heart in God. And so the Bible always, gives us a reassurance, even in difficult times, because we're seeing this big cloud overcome us. And I think it's important that Christians, young people, put their trust in the Lord,
Right.
not in any new institution or newfangled promise. So before we go today, guys, I'll give you a final word here in just a minute, so figure out what you want to say, okay? But I want to promote a couple of books. This one's called One World, Economy, Government, and Religion in the Last Days, talking about globalism and global economics. And this is wonderful. This is a bunch of conservative, even Baptist writers. Ron Bukaki is the editor. One World, it's called. And then another one called Nations United, How the United Nation Undermines Israel and the West. And the United Nations really, since the get-go, has been the chief anti-Israel organization on the earth. They hate Israel. They vote against Israel constantly, 3 times a year at least. And the United States is the number one funder of this. So as well as we're trying to say we support the Israel, it's kind of like we're holding them, like we're sustaining them, and we're also then punching them through funding this kind of stuff. And so people ought to be aware of what's going on and not necessarily bounce back and forth left and right. And of course, as always, Bible Nation on BibleNation.org, the design and destiny of nations. And so one day the Lord Jesus will come and rule and reign over the world. It will be utopian. Mm-hmm. It will be a new world order. It will be a one world order. We believe that. We don't bring that about. We just tell people the good news of Jesus Christ and what he promises us for the future. Amen?
Right.
And we believe in the nation state. And that's what this book talks about, is that the nation state is God's idea. Okay, final words?
So I would say the response, well, first of all, I want you to find the 666 in the United Nations logo for our next podcast. But my final thought would be the response for the Christian is don't fear. Mm-hmm. That's the last thing we want to do, because we know we have the playbook, we have the Bible, we know how this is all going to come to end. But as opposed to fear, Be bold and witness. We have the life raft. We have the saving grace that will help people through this time of fear. And so don't you be a victim to fear, but as the Bible says, go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in. Get people here. Get people the gospel, because there is hope, and that hope is in Jesus Christ. And so don't live in fear.
Amen.
And I think the curiosity of these discussions or lectures it's not, the Bible's very clear on the destination, but it's not as clear on the route. And that's what we're seeing unfold in front of us.
Yeah.
So we know where we're going,
Right.
but as, talk about something global, using Google Maps, it always suggests to you multiple routes on how you can get to the same place.
Right.
And so what we're seeing unfold, we know where we're going. That's how we identify the end course of these routes. But it is curious, it is interesting to watch these things unfold. You read Jeremiah 17:8, but the verse prior to that, it's, blessed is the man that trusteth in the Lord, and whose hope the Lord is.
Amen.
And there it is.
I think some people, Christians, kind of don't look at this stuff because they think, well, the devil's got a, cloven hooves and a pitchfork, but that's not how he's going to come and deceive Christians and deceive the church and overrun America necessarily. And so it's going to be subtle, just like he was subtle in the Garden of Eden. And so we need to be wise, right? Wise as serpents, but harmless as doves. And we need to be confident, and we need to be strong, because we know where it ends, and we actually know who wins, right, in all that. And so we can expect these kinds of deceptions and lies, but we just need to call it out as such. So we could be 100 years away from the events, but this incrementalism and stuff, I think that Christian people need to understand. All right, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to check us out at BibleNation.org. We're on YouTube and Facebook, and of course, we want to hear from you. Thanks again, and remember, the best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven, and it works.